Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Come to the next Dhamma talk in this collection. So this is volume 3 of the Ajahn Sumedho anthology. This is all from the book called The Way It Is, and these are talks that were given during the winter retreat of 1988. This is called The Shining Through of the Divine. Oh, by the way, it's Tan Nidaro. When I was talking yesterday about that simile of getting on the bus and dealing with mental conditions that don't seem to slow down or go away. So I remembered today that one of Luang Por Cha's comments that I found extremely helpful teaching over the years is that 50 to 70% of the practice is knowing that you should let go and not being able to. So that's like being on the bus, like, here we go, I'm on the bus, this is happening, I should let go of this, I should be able to drop this, but it's got so much momentum behind it, it's just not droppable right now. So it might seem like a kind of half-hearted approach, or not trying, you should try harder. But I found it as extremely wise advice. And that the mind that lets go is not the same. It doesn't work for the same company as the mind that holds on. You see what I mean? Yeah. So that they're different parts of our being, our psychology, and so it's just a brief comment that Luang Por Cha made, but it is a really helpful tool in understanding how certain habits, certain attitudes, certain moods just. They get underway and they just keep going. Like, this bus is not going to stop till it gets to Edinburgh. So I thought I'd pass that on. So anyway, back to the shining through of the divine. What is divinity? We may have a vision of a human being as instinctive because we have an animal body with the same instinctive nature as an animal. Survival and procreation are just as strong instincts in us as they are in cats, dogs, and rabbits. But there is also the divine. This is something that we rise up to or turn to because it's not instinctive. It won't be something we'll find unless we deliberately seek it. For reflection on divinity, we have the 4 Brahma-viharas, the beautiful, selfless qualities that can manifest through the human form when there's no self. When you're not caught in instinctive behavior or emotional reactions based on ignorance, when there's dispassion and the whole process of self-view ceases, divinity becomes obvious. Then kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and serenity of mind are not qualities we have to get, but qualities that manifest through these human forms. In our lives as separate individual beings, we relate to things. We have to meet and contact and react or respond to objects all the time throughout our lives. On the physical level, we have to respond to each other's presence in some way, by ignoring, embracing, paying respects, or cursing. In relationships, when there's no self, there is a divinity that manifests. Thus you can see that the human form is a form for the divine. On the other hand, we can think we live just for ourselves. It's my life and I can do what I want. I have the right to happiness, and all that kind of selfishness. If we don't rise above the animal mentality, we can live very much by following our instincts or emotions, or we can live in the world of ideas, of attachment to ideas of how things should be, which is very much a problem in the Western world. But as you penetrate that and see the suffering that comes from grasping anything at all, As that insight brings about letting go and non-attachment, there's a response to the way things are, which can be divided into these 4 categories of the Brahma Viharas. So that is I feel a very good introduction, also a very skillful way of sort of wrapping up these teachings that he's been giving on dependent origination, and pointing out how often we think of, say, Metta or Karuna and so forth, or Upekkha, Mudita, as things that you practice, like they're particular skills that you learn and you practice them. But the point that Luang Por makes here and throughout the Dhamma talk is that it's not. It's a kind of a two-way street. You can practice them to bring your attitudes and your conduct and your speech into alignment with that which is beautiful and holy, divine, Brahma. But also, when if you see what I mean by a two-way street, it's like you can adopt the practice to take you to help to cultivate the attitude, but also if the attitude of not self is there, if there's an attitude of non-identification, non-attachment, then these emotional qualities are what naturally arise. And so that, as Luang Por says, kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy and serenity of mind are not qualities we have to get, but qualities that manifest through these human forms. And this was quite a common theme for Luang Por in this era. He would often use the expression, we have the body of an animal but the mind of a god, as a way of representing the strange mixture that we experience in the human condition. And that's a very kind of evocative and I think quite accurate way of describing what we experience. We have these animal bodies that need to breathe and eat, procreate, excrete and so on, protect their territory and compete for places in the pecking order with other creatures. But we also have these divine qualities, the capacity to be unselfish, to be caring for the well-being of other creatures, and not just our own species, but beings of completely different species. That we have these kind of divine qualities as well. Also, speaking, he's then talking somewhat about the 6 realms, the animal realm. If we don't rise above the animal mentality, we can live very much following our instincts and emotions. So that's what they call the Tirachana Loka. The animal realm is a realm of instincts and reaction, the kind of compulsive behavior of aggressing against others, or so pursuing what you want. And is not very reflective and painful, and a realm of struggle and conflict in many degrees. But then also the Deva realm, we might think, well, the Deva realm is very sort of beautiful and divine, but also his comment here about the world of ideas, that's also really the Deva realm, people who live in the sort of dwelling in abstractions, sort of academic people living in academic realms, or just focused on ideas and principles and opinions, and so that they can be very lofty, very very refined, very high-minded, but also not particularly connected to other beings in any real substantial and helpful way. And so just living in a Deva realm is not, it might be refined, it might have, you spend your days trying to work out the solution to the Riemann hypothesis, or developing your insight into the expansion of the universe and such like kind of lofty scientific pursuits, or the nature of language in sort of medieval manuscripts and such like. But so they can be quite refined and quite, say, wholesome in some respects, but it's not very liberating. And so that's why, again, a few days ago I was saying how it's notable that Buddhas are always born in the human realm. The last life of a Buddha is always in the Manusa Loka, the human realm, because that mixture of the painfulness of the animal body and the limitations of the animal body, but also the capacity for these wholesome and sublime qualities, the capacity for abstract thought, and also the capacity to reflect upon experience and the nature of dukkha and the ending of dukkha. That Buddhas are always born in this most fertile, or bodhisattvas are born in their last life in this most fertile realm of the human condition, because of that mixture of the instinctual and the sublime. Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha provide a reflection. They form a sequence of how to relate to the human realm, to the animal kingdom, and to nature. Metta is very much how we should relate to ourselves too. It's how to relate to ourselves with kindness and acceptance rather than with aversion and judgment. Metta implies accepting something that may not be very nice, such as physical pain, or things that aren't very nice about our body or our character. Maybe you have a lot of fears, or bad temper, or something similar. If you have metta, that means you can accept those things for what they are. You're not judging them or condemning them from an ignorant, self-conscious position. You're aware of them as painful, unpleasant, or ugly. But metta practice is the ability to accept patiently the flaws, pain, irritations, and frustrations within our minds and bodies, and the unpleasant and annoying things that impinge on them from outside. This is because with metta, such things are no longer seen as personal. There's no me and you, no you've done this to me or I've done this to you. Metta is having perspective and not creating a problem even about unfairnesses, injustices, inadequacies and so forth in ourselves, others or society. This doesn't mean that we don't notice or can't see them, but it means that we don't make problems about them. We don't carry them around in our minds with bitterness, resentment, anger, and destructive tendencies. With metta, there's always the ability to forgive and to start anew, to recognize the way things are and not expect everything to fit our ideals regarding how things should be. This doesn't mean that we fatalistically resign ourselves to mediocrity, tyranny, or stupidity, but that we aren't caught in the pattern of ignorance conditioning mind formations. Thus, we can bear with the vicissitudes of life with kindness and acceptance. So I think that's a very good description of metta, as I spoke of the other day, how it's not trying to make ourselves like everything, but cultivating that open-hearted, radical acceptance that, this is the way things are. And then, as Luang Por puts it, doesn't mean that we fatalistically resign ourselves to mediocrity, tyranny, or stupidity, because often when we hear an encouragement like, well, this is the way it is, just be open to the way things are, just accept. What he would say over and over again is, he doesn't use the words here in this talk, but he would often say, acceptance doesn't mean approval. Just because you accept something doesn't mean to say that you like it or you think it's good or it couldn't be done in a different way or in a better way. But it just means, here it is, in this moment, it's exactly like this. So, as he said, it doesn't mean being fatalistic or resigning ourselves to mediocrity, tyranny, or stupidity. Like if you're on the washing up duty and you have a pot sitting there on the side of the sink, and you say, well, this is the way it is. You just leave it there unwashed. It's like, right, but your job to wash the pots is also part of the way it is. So get the scrubber and get the hot water on and start scrubbing. So it can easily be misunderstood as a sort of passive or foolish, fatalistic kind of attitude, but it's not that. As he says, it's just not being caught in the pattern of ignorance conditioning mind formations, so that there's a kind of an attunement and an open-heartedness to the way things are. But with that, there's a recognition of what is wholesome, what's unwholesome, what's doable, what's not doable. That wisdom faculty is part of the picture, and so then that that wisdom faculty is then what informs the choices that are made on the basis of that acceptance, that metta. And Luang Por also briefly mentions with metta there's always the ability to forgive and start anew. So that I feel that's a very important connection, that part of that acceptance is forgiveness, and that kind of creating space for yourself, having made mistakes and done and said foolish things, or being acted in hurtful or destructive ways, and similarly for other people. Forgiveness, the word give in forgiveness is not an accident, it's a giving. You're giving space, you're giving a kind of an opportunity for things to be refreshed. And it's a giving, what they call abhaya dana, the giving of fearlessness. You're not dwelling in aversion or criticism or blaming yourself or other people. You're not taking refuge in kind of hatred, self-hatred or hatred of others. But there's a giving, and it's a giving of fearlessness, because if you really hold no grudge, if there's no patika is the Pali word, if there's no grudge, no real negativity there, people don't need to be afraid of you. Other beings, they don't need to run away from you. Like, we're harmless here, we live by the precepts, so that, when I walk out of my kuti or walk down the path, frequently the pigeons that are picking their way in the grass, or the blackbirds, they kind of look up and they might sort of move a few steps away, or might take off and fly away, but they're pretty casual. They know that we're not going to attack them and eat them. That they know that these two-legged beings are pretty safe, and that's giving fearlessness. They don't need to be afraid of us. So that is also to the other humans that we live with. If you're not carrying around judgments, negative judgments, or grudges about each other, then people don't need to be afraid of you. They don't need to be say anxious about what you're going to say to them, or if you're going to give them a bad time, or you're going to make life difficult for them. So that's a kind of generosity, and of the different kinds of giving. Then the Buddha pointed to abhaya dana as being something that is superior to material giving. Amisa dana is giving of material gifts. Abhaya dana is the giving of fearlessness. And he also pointed out taking the 5 precepts. He also said these are called the 5 great gifts, mahadana, because of one who lives by the 5 precepts is giving immeasurable freedom from anxiety, freedom from distress, freedom from fear to other beings, and also to yourself. So, any questions, comments, thoughts? Anagarika Philippe, yes.
Thank you, Ajahn. It's actually more a question about the last few readings, about perception. I read that in the dependent origination, we could say, instead of perception, memories. Well, someone translated as memories. And so I thought about it, and I had an experience. I went for the meal, and I had a strong desire for food. And actually, when I was eating, I could see that, in a way, I had no perception, because as soon as the food was in my mouth and then the pleasure was there, it was already a memory. I was already running after something which was vanished. It's like I could never stop on the nice perception of it. It was it was gone. So I could continue like that, and then after I eat too much, and dukkha is really strong. So it was really funny to see. Yeah, then I couldn't see the perception. I couldn't feel it. It was really just memories, and yeah. And then my mind was just running after it and couldn't catch it, So I was wondering if you could just comment on this.
Yeah, I think you've been ruined. So your career as a chef is definitely over. I'm joking, but it's very good to see things in that kind of a way. That it's kind of a conjuring trick. You know, a conjuring trick, like a magician performs a trick so that it because of the way the trick is done, it seems as though something is happening. But when you break it down, it's like, oh no, it was just an illusion. That wasn't what was happening at all. It was just an appearance. And so when we look at the relationship between contact, feeling, perception, thinking, memory, and so on, then if it's really broken down, then the conclusion that the mind comes to is, well, there's nothing really there. It's why do I get so excited about this, or why is this so upsetting, or why do I make such a big deal out of this? Wow. And so it's like seeing how the trick is done. Like you see how the magician did the trick. And then once you've seen it, you kind of can be tricked again, but you can't be tricked to quite the same extent. So that it kind of ruins us for worldly living, which is good. It's because we might like to dwell in those kind of illusions, or get enjoy being carried away sometimes. But it's very liberating, because it's like the mind can't be fooled by those appearances so easily, and that I mean, it doesn't mean to say that there won't be other experiences that are more pleasurable, or that have a different quality later on. But I would say that just seeing things like that is extremely helpful. And sometimes it was particularly when the mind is chasing after some kind of pleasant experience, and you think, oh, I've got to have more, this is really great, I love this, this is fantastic. When you really bring attention to the thing that you're calling lovely and desirable, and you want more of it, then bringing close attention to that, you can recognize this is actually quite uncomfortable. This is not a particularly pleasant state at all. I'm tense, and I can't breathe very easily, and my heart rate is really fired up, and this is quite uncomfortable. But we don't notice that. So that's one part of it. And then at the other end of the scale, equally interesting but with a very different tone, is that things that are really unpleasant, that we really don't want to happen, or we've got to get away from, when we feel, I can't stand that, that's really awful. In exactly the same way, if you bring attention to that process of what you hate, or you tell yourself you can't stand, or you really don't want to be with, then you find, oh my goodness, this is not that bad at all. Why do I spend so much time and effort trying to get away from this, or avoiding this? It's such hard work to try and stop feeling this, but actually it's not that bad at all. So that kind of close attention and reflection, like that, so a combination of concentration and mindfulness and wise reflection, they have a very balancing effect. They help the mind to not be sort of so intoxicated by both painful experiences and pleasant experiences, or what we call painful and what we call pleasant, so that there's much more of an evenness of attitude in respect to that whole perceptual process. Okay, so on to Karuna. Then there's Karuna, compassion. When we see the suffering of others and the injustices and unfairness that exist, we respond with compassion, but not like a wealthy person feeling sorry for the poor. That's not it. It's not looking down on the poor, not patronizing or feeling sorry for people, but understanding the predicament of our human condition and all that goes with it. It's from understanding the nature of suffering, how it arises and ceases, that you can have true Karuna for other beings. The British have a lot of Karuna for animals. Britain is quite an impressive country when you think how much wildlife there is in its densely populated area of southern England. That's a good quality, Karuna. Britain is a kind country where people generally have developed compassion, concern for the unfortunate and the underprivileged. I think people really appreciate that. When I was visiting Abhayagiri Monastery a couple of years ago in California, and I mentioned how we had to have this bat survey before we could take down Lotus House, and that if there was a single bat, there was one bat dropping there in Lotus House, which indicated there might be a bat roosting there. So we had to delay the whole demolition of the building, so that the possibility that one bat would not be disturbed, and that you had a whole kind of department in the local council that made sure that the bats were protected. And when I mentioned that to the people there in the States, they said, "Are you serious? I mean, it's your building, it's on your property, you can't just knock it down?" I said, "Oh, no. There's strict regulations about looking after the wild creatures. And if you have newts, you have to, if you have newts living on the property, then you have to make sure that the newt habitat is not disturbed." And so I feel that's a very beautiful quality, a great strength of this country, that people really care for the living beings of all kinds. Often that the care for dogs and cats in particular, there's more concern for their welfare than there are for the other humans. I remember years ago there was a kind of banner headline of one of the tabloid papers of a London gangster who'd been living in sort of exile in Spain. He'd been assassinated by some rival, and the fact that he'd been bumped off and sort of shot was kind of startling and a cause for concern. But they shot his dog. And that was what made the headlines of the paper, was that they shot the dog. And there was this kind of tragic picture of the dog by the swimming pool. And there was this kind of outrage. They shot the bloke as well. But there was the fact that the assassin would kill the dog too. It was just so appalling, so awful, so dreadful. I thought maybe not only in Britain, but it's very much a character where how heartless, how awful to shoot the dog. Shooting the gangster, okay, it's sort of par for the course in the kind of human competitive world. But shooting the dog, how could they? But again, I feel that's a very noble and beautiful quality that we have in this country, that we really care for the welfare of other beings, and being cruel to animals as well as being cruel to people is really something that's really hurtful. People really look down on that, and that's something that you're from an early age in this country that you're very strongly trained to never be cruel to animals. When we moved to Chithurst, there were people who didn't want us there, but most of the local people tried to be fair. In other words, they had a certain measure of compassion for us. They would not have harmed us or tried to get rid of us, even though they may have preferred a nice Christian monastery or a nice proper upper-class family to buy Chithurst House, a family who would keep horses and play polo. That would have been more in line with the general mood of West Sussex, because people like what they're used to. But because Metta Karuna were already developed, only a few people were directly hostile or wanted to take action against us. So one can regard this as Metta Karuna. Also, there's another word for compassion, anukampa. When the request for the Dhamma talk is made, anukampimang pajang. So anukampati is another word for compassion, and it literally means, it's more like the word empathy. If people know that word, it literally means to resonate with, And sometimes you get the translation, trembling for the welfare of all beings. So it's a kind of empathizing. And so that I think the English word compassion, it literally means to suffer with. Com is with, passio is from the Latin to suffer. And so I think anukampati is a bit more close to the actual correct translation of the word, or karuna. Similarly, it's not really compassion, because in Buddhist psychology, to have compassion for the suffering of others doesn't mean that you're suffering with them. It's a great brightness, like I was saying about upekkha. Karuna or anukampa it's a brightness of heart. It's not a state of suffering. So that if you're suffering on account of the suffering of others, that's not true karuna or anukampa. There's an empathy, there's an appreciation of the pain that other beings have, but you're not suffering on account of the suffering of others. So I feel that's an important quality, and it's in a way the very word we have in English, compassion, it generally points us towards if others are suffering, you should be suffering too. But in terms of Buddhist psychology, I feel it's helpful to recognize that, you can totally care and work hard to relieve the suffering of others, but you're not suffering because they're suffering. You want to help, but you're not creating anguish or distress in your own heart on account of the suffering of others. That makes sense? Any thoughts, questions? Gaspar?
So, just maybe a few reflections on the topic of compassion, inspired by what you were mentioning, sort of being compassionate towards animals, etc. It seems that we as humans tend to be compassionate towards those to whom we don't attribute any particular sense of agency or volition, in the sense that we are more likely to sort of be or not be compassionate to fellow humans when we assume that they are the masters of their own actions, as opposed to animals, which kind of we tend to regard as sort of automatons or biological machines. That's one thing I want to sort of comment, and I'm curious about your reflections on this. And then there's another one where, also on the topic of animal cruelty, which I've observed, by means of being sort of compassionate towards animals, people can become uncompassionate to other people. It's in a sense that they cling to this idea of compassion and protection towards animals, but then they can sort of, this can manifest in being harsh and quite nasty to fellow humans. So
yes,
thank you.
There's interesting points. For myself, I don't think I don't find that it's just to do with agency. I find I can be very compassionate towards political leaders who are not very lovable, but that they're really stuck in a particular point of view or destructive behaviors and create all kinds of chaos and difficulty around them. And there is that compassionate feeling, like, poor guy. What can be done to help this person not create such a mess around themselves so often? So that I do take your point. I think it's in the ordinary run of things, that's very common. That it's if things are not so able to control their own environment and much more the subject to circumstances. But I do feel that it's, even though that people can be critical of, members of their own family or the people in their institutions that they're part of, the workplace or the monastery or the in the government, that people can react with criticism and blaming and aversion, but in cultivating the Brahma Viharas, that quality of compassion is, I think, is really important, because and particularly that sense of empathizing. Because if you're talking with someone, or if you're connected with someone, and that they appreciate that you're not just attacking them, you're not just blaming them or criticizing them, but there's a genuine empathy there. You really care for them. And what you find is you can say things or make statements or put things forward that might be exactly what they don't want to hear, but because of the quality of empathy, and that they know this person, he's not just attacking me, it's not just because he hates me, as a genuine caring. And so that then you can sometimes communicate a message in a much better way than if there isn't that quality of empathy. If it's just like a well-reasoned argument, what you mean is you're bad, you're wrong, and you shouldn't be that way. But if there's a genuine empathy, and you realize, well, this poor person, they've really dug themselves into a corner. And they've made a really painful situation for themselves, and so then they've got plenty of agency. They've made plenty of fairly independent choices, but then that quality of compassion can be there to be motivated to help them to act in different ways, or to help them get out of that corner they've painted themselves into. And then the second point you made was about, and I mean it's a very often observed quality. Sometimes the people who are most ardent in terms of caring for the animal world, or of sort of causes of peacefulness and well-being, can be the most kind of reactive, angry, and destructive, to be honest, kind of really hurtful in their attitudes. I mean, it's not just ironic. I think it's tragic that there's a kind of it's a sort of I would say like a wrong grasping of high-mindedness. That yes, it's a noble principle to be caring for the welfare of animals, or to be looking after this particular aspect of the environment, or this particular social injustice. But because of the mind grasping it in such a way, then you can find yourself unconsciously developing incredible hatred, just bitter, real harshness, real bitterness, and so that even though it's based on a nobility and wholesome, skillful attitudes, the effect, well, at least one of the effects is, even while they're trying to bring into being those sort of noble qualities and do helpful, skillful work, along with that, they're bringing in this kind of destructiveness and harshness and divisiveness, and so it's a tragic thing. And living the life that I do and being in the position that I have, I'm meeting people in that kind of situation fairly regularly, and but it's difficult to help people, again, to know how to help people out of that, or just making a comment or offering a reflection at the right moment. You have to choose your words and your timing really well. But often it's very challenging to do that, because the people often they've got a very, very well worked out philosophy of why that's good and why that's right, and why they have that particular way of approaching those issues, and why it's really important, and so that they've got it kind of mapped out in their own mind. And so it's not a matter of coming up with a good argument to counter that, but rather some way of communicating. Do you realize what you're doing to yourself? Do you realize how, the way that you're speaking, and the amount of bitterness and divisiveness there is in the way you're speaking. Can you hear that? And so sometimes, if you're coming from a genuine place of empathy and caring, then that sometimes can get through. It might be rejected, sort of at the surface level, but then and only later on the person realizes, actually, he might be right. Yeah, I do really go on a bit, don't I? Or like, wow, yeah, I do use that kind of language. Yeah. So why? Yeah, that's a fair point. So sometimes in the actual exchange that you're having, you can have the door shut in your face. But if you're really coming from a place of sincerity and communion, there's a real communication. A communion has been happening. Then some way or other it gets through to the other person. And it might take a while to surface, but my experience is that generally it will, somehow or other. So, on to Mudita, which is a long section. Sometimes in Theravada Buddhism, one gets the impression that one shouldn't enjoy beauty. If you see a beautiful flower, still doing... It's been here for days, they don't seem to decay at all. They're real. They're amazing. These beautiful flowers continuing to be a very good object to refer to. You see a beautiful flower, you should contemplate its decay, or if you see a beautiful woman, you should contemplate her as a rotting corpse. This has a certain value on one level, but it's not a fixed position to take. It's not that we should feel compelled to reject beauty and dwell on its impermanence and on how it changes to not being so beautiful and then downright repulsive. That's a good reflection on anicca, dukkha and anatta, but it can leave the impression that beauty is only to be reflected on in terms of these three characteristics, rather than in terms of the experience of beauty. This is the joy of mudita, being able to appreciate the beauty in the things around us. Flowers are a lot prettier than we are. We admit they're prettier. We expect them to be. We don't envy them their beauty, but we might really hate somebody else for being beautiful, because then it's a threat. Somebody else's beauty makes me look not so beautiful. This is to be observed, not to try to force a kind of false happiness onto the situation, but to let these things cease in your mind. To be clearly aware of this particular problem is to stay with it and not make a problem about it from the self-view. Recognize it as anicca, dukkha, anatta. Let it cease. Let go of it. Then in that letting go, we find a rejoicing in the talents, the goodness, and the beauty of other beings. When you look at flowers, you experience a joyful feeling, and that's mudita. You're rejoicing in or glad at the beauty of something. Maybe you've never reflected like that. We see beautiful things in nature, and because they're no threat to us or anything else, we can rejoice in the sunset, or the beauty of trees and mountains and rivers. So that's mudita, a rejoicing in beauty, goodness and truth. And we rejoice in the goodness of others. When somebody does something good, or you hear about some noble action, heroic effort or self-sacrifice, a sense of mudita arises. That's joy, sympathetic joy. But we tend to fall short of this when it becomes a matter of you and me. We can be very jealous of somebody's health and beauty if we are caught in self-view. We might feel joy at the flowers in the garden, but then go to a neighbour's house where the flowers are more beautiful than ours. We might feel envy because, from a self-position, it's her flowers look better than mine, and she's more beautiful than I am, or he's better looking than I am, he's more intelligent, or he has a better personality. So we suffer from envy and jealousy. It's a very common problem. In fact, many human beings are really stuck in envy and jealousy. If one were to go to a rich person's house with beautiful grounds, a swimming pool, beautiful oriental carpets and lovely furnishings, a selfless person might rejoice at being in a beautiful place. Or one might think, wealthy people probably got rich from cheating the poor and ripping off the underprivileged. Grumble, grumble, grumble. I remember once going into a beautiful church in London with somebody. I said, "Oh, what a lovely church." He said, "Yeah, it was probably at the expense of all those colonies the British exploited." But I wasn't commenting on history, but experiencing the gladness of being in a beautiful place. And yet we can think that maybe that church was built out of the slave trade or the opium trade. Perhaps slave traders and drug traffickers centuries ago felt guilty, so they built a magnificent church in London. But that doesn't mean that it's not beautiful. We're not judging it on the moral plane, but reflecting on the joy, on the experience of beauty, goodness, and truth. These are what bring joy into our lives. People who can't see the beauty of the good or the true are really bitter and mean at heart. They live in an ugly realm where there's no rejoicing in beauty, goodness, and truth. To rejoice in these things doesn't mean that we get carried away with them. The experience of joy no longer occurs if we indulge in beauty and try to grasp it, or if we hold on to the experience of joy to try to have it all the time. But mudita is certainly a part of our human experience. Mudita is our ability to be joyful with the beauty and the loveliness of life's experiences. It's a sense of joy and appreciation and gratitude for the beauties and the lovely things of life, the lovely things in other people. So when there's no self, then there's joy. We find joy in the goodness, the beauty of the people around us, or in society, or in natural conditions. Once you have insight, you find you enjoy, delight in the beauty and goodness of things. Truth, beauty, and goodness delight us. In them we find joy. That is mudita. But if you see beauty as something to grasp, it arouses desire. You see beautiful human beings, a beautiful woman or man, and you think, "I want." That's desire. It's not rejoicing in the beauty of someone, it's the desire to possess, control, and get something for yourself out of it. At the level of instinct, that's the way it is. It's natural enough. If we didn't find each other attractive, no one would want to perpetuate the species. If sexual activities were painful and miserable, nobody would want to do them. And if we found each other totally repulsive and ugly, we wouldn't want to get close to each other, not to mention anything as intimate as sex. Desire is a natural way on that level of the sensory realm. There's nothing wrong with it, but there is the possibility for a human being to transcend it. If desire was all we were and all we could do, we should always follow it. But because we can transcend it, we have this connection to the divine. We can rise above the coarse, instinctive nature of our bodies and the animal realm. And that's what I'm pointing to. I'm not condemning the animal realm. Animals can bring us a lot of joy. Down at Chithurst recently, I spent the day with Doris, our cat. I've always felt she brought me a lot of joy. She's a very pleasant animal. If I got attached to her, however, I'd say, "I've got to have Doris. I've got to bring Doris here to Amaravati. I can't live without her." Then I'd drag her up here, and she'd have to fight with the cats who live here. And it would all be just for me, just so I could get what I wanted. That wouldn't be a joyful experience anymore. It would cause a lot of problems. We can reflect on how things affect us, always to want mudita. The beautiful flowers, the waterfalls, and the beautiful birds singing means that you can't rejoice in them anymore because you're trying to hold on. You're trapped in all kinds of views and opinions about them, so that even if you're in the midst of them, you're not really enjoying them, rejoicing in them anymore, because you've been separated from them through your desire for them. That's a very interesting point that Luang Por makes there. You're trapped in all kinds of views and opinions about them, so that even if you're in the midst of them, you're not really enjoying them. Kind of like what Philippe was saying about the food. You're not really enjoying them, rejoicing in them anymore, because you've been separated from them through your desire for them. I mean, not exactly what Philippe was saying, but that brings to mind a well-known little poem by William Blake, who was an English poet of the 18th century, I think, 19th century, and it was a little verse about joy, and he says, "He who binds himself to a joy doth the winged life destroy. He that kisseth a joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." So the English is a little bit antiquated, but it means if you bind yourself to a joy, like, yes, that's mine, I want to keep this is great, then you, it says, doth the winged life, so the life which is sort of taken as a sort of a flying bird, it destroys things, it crushes them, so that trying to keep and hold and possess something joyful, that is a destructive attitude. But he that kisseth a joy as it flies, to kiss the joy as it flies, just to appreciate it, but not to try and hold it or own it or keep it or act out of tanha in relationship to it, then, as he says, you live in eternity's sunrise. So it's a very poetic way of speaking, but it captures a very significant point. And Luang Por would quote that same poem from time to time as well. So it's William Blake on joy, and that the art or the skill is then to be ready to know and to delight in the beauty of the flowers or the qualities of other people around you, and just to not add anything to it, to not try and own or to keep or to make a whole thing about it, but just to appreciate, as he says, to kiss the joy as it flies, to appreciate that, and then to let go of any kind of owning or possessing or trying to make much of. Any thoughts, questions? Venerable Chitta Samvara.
Yeah, it's more just a quick reflection. One of the I think it's a poem in the verses of the elders, maybe by Mahakassapa, about these rocky crags delight me. Do you know that one? It's talking about like peacocks and elephants and
it's I think it's Mahakassapa, rejoicing in the rocks and the trees and the mountains.
Yeah, I always find that very pleasant to find this in sort of Theravadan sort of literature, because there isn't ever so much of that kind of appreciating natural beauty, whereas so that was all really just very quick.
Yeah, there's not a lot of that in the Pali Canon, but also you have the Buddha saying that the Tathagata delights in wild places, in the forest, and living in away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and delights in living in the forest. And also in the Mahagosinga Sutta, where there's this beautiful moonlit night in the forest, and all the trees are flowering, and there's this fragrance of the blossoms filling the night, and that over and over again you get the sense that that's really appreciated, and it's used as a symbol of what kind of a monastic would illuminate the forest on a beautiful night like this. So that sense of, wow, what a lovely night! It's the moonlight is filling the forest, and the flowers are all blooming, and the air is filled with this wonderful fragrance. It's kind of like a divine presence. And so that you do get little flashes of that here and there. Okay, just read a little bit more. I'll finish off Mudita. In our life as samanas, contemplating nature, contemplating the Dhamma, we don't have to think that all beauty is just there to corrupt us and give us another rebirth. That's another self-view. But be aware of how beauty affects you. When you see a beautiful woman or a handsome man, how does that affect your mind? There may be an initial attraction, and then you can easily start to feel threatened and reject the person because we have a life of celibacy. Or you might give a second glance and dally with the sexual thoughts that might arise from that eye contact. But the more that you are mindful, the less you tend to follow things as desire, the less you tend to create or add to the feelings with desire and attachment. When you're mindful, you don't do that. Enlightenment doesn't mean a kind of bland indifference. Sometimes enlightenment is made to sound as if it means becoming emotionless zombies, people who don't feel anything anymore. Well, as long as there's self, what we call joy tends to be tinged with selfishness. It becomes stained with ourselves. We become jealous if we have something beautiful and somebody else has something more beautiful, because selfishness always turns beauty into possessiveness. If the beauties of life, the joy of truth and beauty and goodness are coming from self, they're always corrupted with jealousy, envy, and begrudging people. So if there's selfishness, even being the most beautiful of all is not really a joyful experience, because you're always worried that someone else might claim that crown. If you adopt a self-view, there's always that possibility. But when there's no self, beauty doesn't belong to anyone. It's not mine or yours. We realize there's no possibility of possessing it anyway, so there's no desire to possess, so there can be the joy of the experience of beauty without it being corrupted by selfishness. So that's, I think, a very beautiful exposition on mudita, particularly rejoicing in the gifts and good qualities of other people, and so that because we as human beings, we can be quite competitive and be comparing ourselves with others very easily, it's not just confined to any one nationality or any particular gender or any particular sort of social background or education. It's just how we are as human beings. We're sort of a tribal species. We compare and compete with each other. So I feel it's definitely in the Brahma Vihara realm. It's sort of the Brahma realm whereby you're strengthening that quality of the heart that delights in somebody else being more skilled than you are. It's like, wow, he's a much better chanter, or she's really good at arranging the flowers, or really attentive in the business meetings, or these kind of genuine delighting in the good qualities that other people have. And that you don't feel like you've got to be the best, or you've got to outshine other people. So for myself, one of the things that being in the role of a teacher, I wouldn't want to be always wiser than the people that I teach. I would feel that I've succeeded in the role of teaching if the people that I teach end up being much wiser and more liberated than I am. I think that's a sign of a good teacher, is that the pupils outshine the teacher, and that I feel is a skillful aspiration. When you're in the role of teaching, if you've always got to be smarter than everyone and ahead of everyone and be outshining everyone, and wanting to have everyone sort of look up to you and be sort of impressed. Well, I could never be like him or like her. I would say that you're steering things in an unskillful direction, and that's in my not very humble opinion. But I do feel it's helpful to have that in mind, and that these kind of, as Luang Por points out, these sort of envious or jealous reactions can easily arise for us as part of our strong sort of instinctual conditioning, our kind of tribal conditioning. That where are you in the pecking order? Are you you're an alpha or a beta or a gamma, or you the delta male down at the bottom of the tribe, bottom of the heap. So we don't have to live our lives in that way. We don't have to judge each other or compete with each other in those ways, or feel jealous of each other, but rather to find that place in the heart that says, oh wow, she's so much better at that than I am. That's great. Excellent. And not just sort of excellent, through clenched teeth. Like, I'm so happy that you're so good at that. I'm really pleased for you. It's no, not through clenched teeth, but really from the heart. Like, wow, that person is so much better. It's like I don't really have a very practical sense when it comes to material things. I'm more of a words and ideas kind of a person, and I don't really have a very good sense of three-dimensional space. I can't imagine things in three-dimensional space very well. People like Ajahn Amaro are extraordinarily skilled. And I found living with Ajahn Pasno in California, he was very, very practical, and has got a very good sense of construction and arranging things. And so I would come from a sort of theoretical position, or just sort of where, what order we wrote things in on a list, and let's do that first because it's what I thought of first. And he would say, well, no, that doesn't make sense. We should build this kuti first, and then do that one and that one and that one in that order, because that's the natural progression of putting the paths in on the hillside. Or just recognizing that if you want to feed the water to the kuti, you put the water tank further up the hill, so the water can run downhill. And, think, well, there's a nice flat spot. We could put the water tank there. It's like, Ajahn, water doesn't flow uphill. You need to pump. Use Mother Nature's pump. If you put the tank up above, make a little bench, and then put the tank up there, then the water can just come down to the kuti. Oh, right, good idea. So I really did a lot of sort of mudita for Ajahn Pasno's very skillful qualities. There was a lot of mudita practice of rejoicing in his sort of attentiveness, his skill, and those particular qualities. And but I do feel that what Luang Por is saying here about mudita is very helpful, particularly in terms of community life and how we look at each other, how we judge each other, and we can easily put people into boxes and sort of say, "Oh, she's like this, and he's like that," and that's not a very joyful attitude. It's not a very joyful way of operating. And so, the fact is that some people are more skilled at certain things than others. There are natural divisions or discriminations, for sure. But we don't have to fix that. We don't have to typecast each other or make rigid judgments. And this conscious appreciation of the good qualities of the people around us, just the very fact that you're living with someone, they might not be so good as you are at chanting or at sewing robes or whatever, but the very fact that they're a fellow monastic, they're a sahadhammika, they're a fellow dhammathera, that is to be rejoiced. Sometimes we can forget that because she can't sew a straight line. What an idiot! It's like, so she's a nun. He's totally hopeless, can't chant in tune. Yeah, but he's a monk. 99% of what there is in the picture is the fact of being in robes and keeping the precepts. The chanting is only 1% of the picture. But we can so easily just fix on the small details and judge each other with those kind of narrow, areas of activity and community life, and forget the bigger picture. So I see, and we've gone past 7 o'clock, so I'll leave it there for today.